He had watched his gorgeous wife work her way across the ballroom for the last 30 minutes, so that, with impeccable timing, she was as far from him as possible when the ball dropped at midnight. Surrounded by her rich, self-important peers, she would be passed around like a platter of hors d'oeuvre, kissed on and felt up by all the executives where he worked, with special affection from his born-rich, imbecilic boss. He knew this because his company's New Year's Eve party had played out just like this for the past 2 years. The first year, he let it go, attributing it to too much champagne. Last year, however, the clarion call sounded loud, and he began making provisions. Feeling a tug at his coat, he turned to face Deirdre, Josephine's best friend and co-conspirator. "Happy New Year, Mike!" she exclaimed, reaching up to pull his head down for his annual pity kiss. He barely brushed her lips before pulling away and looking down into her brown eyes. Deirdre was another society doyen, a trust fund baby like his wife, from an even richer family than Joe's. He expected to see the little smirk she usually gave him, clarifying that she knew things he didn't, because she was from the landed gentry, like his wife and his boss. Instead, he saw 2 new emotions, pity and concern. "Mike, don't take this so seriously. She's just exchanging kisses, in the grand New Year's tradition. She'll be back in a little while, none the worse for wear, and she will show you again how much she loves you." He looked at her skeptically. Deirdre tried to reassure him. "She really does love you, you know. She's just very outgoing, vivacious, and impetuous, while you are intellectual and taciturn. Sometimes she needs a chance to be with others more like herself, but time with them only increases her appreciation for you." "Okay, Deirdre. So that's why she spent all her time at her company's Christmas party under the mistletoe with her co-workers? We go to her Christmas party and she spends the night dancing with and kissing the top executives at her firm, and here tonight, at my firm's New Year's ball, she spends all night dancing with and now kissing, no, making out with, the executives from my firm. So by being entangled with everyone at the party except me, she is gaining new appreciation for me? Interesting concept. Tell me, is it another New Year's grand tradition to kiss George the imbecile a dozen times? Or is that just her way of showing her love for me, since, you know, she knows how much I hate the little woman?" I'll give Deirdre this. She had enough compunction to be embarrassed. She could not hold my gaze, so she looked away and tried again. "Mike, I see how upset you are, but you need to understand." "Really, Deirdre, I think I do understand. For the first time in our 5-year marriage, I think I really do understand," I shouted. I turned my back on her, returned to our table, retrieved and opened the briefcase I had placed under the table, and extracted a rather large, brightly wrapped package. With my back still to her, I pulled the ring off my finger and tied it in the middle of the bow she had to remove to open the package. Turning back to Deirdre, I held the package out. "I'm going to leave now. Please give this to your friend when, or if, she tears herself out of the grasp of the men surrounding her. Tell her I said Happy New Year, and I hope she gets everything she deserves in 2025. I turned to go, but Deirdre pulled at my arm. "Don't leave, Mike. I'll go get her. She's just had a little too much champagne again. You need to take her home." "No, Deirdre, I don't. She has a room here at the hotel. She's been here all day, entertaining men while I worked. Of course you know all that, because you've been here with her. She has her own car, her clothes, everything she needs. I'm certain that at least one of the gentlemen she's busy kissing will be more than happy to keep her happy. Or maybe they all will. Don't give me that look. You told me all the same lies last year. I gave her this year to decide. She has, and so have I. Goodbye, Deirdre. I can't say it won't be a relief to never see you again." As I made my way out of the ballroom, I nodded at Helen, the HR director with whom I spent the early part of the afternoon, while my boss and his cronies helped set things up at the hotel. In reality, he was in the palatial suite he had reserved with the company credit card, having intimacy with my wife. Actually, I should have said they, were in the palatial suite with my wife, and I have the photographs and video to prove it. Helen does too, and the chairman of the board will within minutes. After I exited the ballroom, Helen and her husband made their way to the crowd of men around Josephine. Deirdre was fighting her way through the horde of men, many of whom were insistent on kissing her in the grand tradition. A few tried to accost Helen, but they seemed to find the scowl of her husband, a former All-Pro lineman, to be discouraging. She made it through the crowd to CEO George Burke and his paramour just before Deirdre did. She stopped her husband about 6 feet away and watched. Deirdre's distraught look and shrill calling of her name caught Joe's attention and broke George's embrace. She frowned at her friend's frantic look. Helen smiled. Deirdre held out the gaudily wrapped present and said something to Joe, who took the package, leaned closer, and seemingly asked Deirdre to repeat herself. "Mike left this for you. He's gone, Joe. He watched you flirting and teasing all night, and when you started kissing all these men, he gave me this package and left." Joe smiled. "Oh, you know Mike. He throws these little snit fits when I neglect him for a few minutes. I'll go home, beg his forgiveness, love him silly, and all will be well. He loves me. See, even when he's mad, he leaves my gift. Let's see what it is." "Joe, I don't think it's a gift," Deirdre began, but Joe was busily untying the ribbon to open the package. When the ring hit the ground, he paused, frowned, and said, "What is that?" George bent over, picked it up, held it out to her, and smirked. "Isn't this your husband's wedding ring?" She stopped tearing at the paper, looked puzzled, and took the ring. She looked at Deirdre, who said, "I tried to tell you." Joe began tearing the wrapping off the gift and found a white gift box inside. Reassured, she smiled, shook the box, said, "It's heavy," and began cutting the scotch tape on each side with her fingernail. When the tape on the third side broke, the contents of the box fell out and scattered across the floor. She squatted in her knee-length gown so she could pick up the glossy sheets that had fallen. Others were squatting to pick up the ones that had sailed over near them. Suddenly, everyone froze. Joe's eyes grew wide, and she screamed, "No!" Her cry drew the attention of others in the area, and more people moved into their circle. Deirdre's eyes were also wide in disbelief. She glanced up and saw the look of horror on George's face. He snatched the 8 by 10 inches glossy color photo at his feet off the ground, held it against his expensive suit, and involuntarily yelled, "What the hell, Joe?" loudly enough that everyone in the proximity heard him. All eyes went down to the photos lying all about and saw Joe engaged in love acts with persons, not her husband. There were numerous pictures of Joe and George, but also of Joe with other executives of the firm where Mike worked, and with Joe's co-workers and bosses. There weren't enough to cover the positions of the Kama Sutra, but Mike had done a good job of selecting photos that proved Josephine enjoyed various love stuff. Faced with a photo array of her adventures, Joe fainted. She pitched over backwards, and only hitting George's shoe kept her head from striking the tile floor and sustaining a likely concussion. Deirdre knelt beside her, held the back of her head with her hand, lightly slapped her face, and frantically cried, "Joe! Joe! Are you all right, Joe? Talk to me, Joe. Are you all right?" While the two women were on the floor, others began picking up the photos and looking at them. One woman then turned and slapped her husband as hard as she could while he was looking down at a photo he was holding. "You serial cheater! No wonder you can't keep me satisfied!" He looked at her in stunned silence until she swung her purse and caught him in the right eye. He clutched his eye, screamed in pain, and then crumpled to the floor when she kicked him in the balls with her closed-toe pump. The woman knelt down and began systematically going through the photos on the ground. She paused, looked up, and declared, "You women who are married to the management of Taylor & Son might want to grab some of these photos and check them out. I see pictures of several other husbands I know with those two cheating women. If you want to save on your divorce attorney, call me and I'll see if I can get us a group rate." 9 other women knelt and began examining photos, and men began backing away. "There are USB drives, too," one announced loudly as she held one up. "No telling what is on these." "You rotten jerk," yelled a pretty blonde at a well-dressed older man. "Remember our prenup? I'll bankrupt your sorry back." "Baby, I'm sorry. It didn't mean anything. She just kept hitting on me and finally I gave in, but it was only once, and she wasn't nearly as good as you anyway, and—" he pleaded. "Liar!" the blonde screamed, holding up 2 more photos showing evidence. The blonde popped up off the floor and advanced on him with murder in her eyes, waving the photos and cussing a blue streak. He retreated backwards, then turned and ran when she got close. Another woman was sobbing, clutching her breast with one hand and waving a photo in the other. Her husband had his hand over his eyes, and he too was sobbing. A man retrieved a photo, held it in front of the gorgeous woman facing him, and loudly said, "You're bi?" "What the hell? You shameless cheater. You told me I'd never get my 3-way because you'd never be with a woman." She flushed, turned, and ran away, tottering precipitously in her 4-inch heels. Another woman had picked 6 photos out of the pile and was calling names as she walked toward the middle of the ballroom. A puzzled woman stopped her, received a photo, stared at it, and turned back to her husband with murder on her face. He began retreating, and she began trotting toward him, waving the photo. That scene would repeat itself 5 more times, and each time those around the aggrieved got an earful and an eyeful. Joe is awake now, staring at the scene around her with glazed eyes. A man in an expensive tuxedo knelt beside her. He asked, "Are you all right?" She looked at him curiously and nodded. He asked, "Who are you? Can I help?" "I'm Josephine Lord," she replied morosely, "but I don't think anyone can help me now." "You're Josephine Reynolds Lord?" he asked incredulously. She nodded and asked, "I am. Who are you?" The man handed her a packet of papers he was carrying, took her picture with his phone, and loudly proclaimed, "I'm a process server. You've been served, Josephine Reynolds Lord. These papers detail and the enclosed photographs and videos prove the adultery alleged in Michael Morris Lord's petition for divorce." He turned to the larger group. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't get to look through the photos, simply acquire a copy of the divorce documents, which are public records available online. The names of every human being with whom Joe the Hoe had intimacy over the course of the past year are listed, as well as where and when. For a nominal fee, I can provide a link to the Joe the Hoe website that fully chronicles her exploits since January 1st of last year. If you would like to review them to determine whether your husband or wife was involved in physical liaisons with Joe, you can contact me online at my website and, for that nominal fee, a link to her website will be provided. For an additional nominal fee, I can provide digital copies of the activities of a participant. You will find such evidence to be very helpful in court. I look forward to hearing from you." He bowed deeply and strode away, leaving tears, fears, and panic in his wake. He would catch hell for this stunt, but he was paid very, very well to do it. Besides, this was New York, and his office was in New Jersey, where his family held a lot of sway. Joe was still holding the divorce papers in her lap as she reclined in the arms of her friend, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. She looked at the faces gathered around her and saw hatred, pity, anger, and trepidation. The inescapable admiration, lust, and envy she had known her entire privileged life was entirely absent, and the enormity of her loss and disgrace finally sunk in. She crumpled back onto Deirdre and buried her face in her friend's bosom, sobbing inconsolably. George Taylor ordered his minions to pick up those damn pictures and burn them. Looking directly at Helen, he ordered, "I want a letter of reprimand from Mike Lord on my desk Monday, and his termination papers under it." With a neutral expression, Helen stated, "I'm sorry, Mr. Taylor, but Mr. Lord resigned this afternoon. He gave his 2 weeks' notice, using the leave you signed off on last week. took all his supplies and materials, and vacated the building. "I will not accept his resignation. I will fire him after the reprimand. He'll never work in this business again," he shouted. "Again, I'm sorry, Mr. Taylor, but he met with the chairman of the board before he left, and your father accepted his resignation. Mr. Lord already has another job, with one of the firms with which he was consulting. With your written permission, sir." Taylor's face was so red those listening and watching feared he would have a stroke while he muttered loud curses at his father and Mike Lord. Helen and her husband watched his consternation with glee, squeezing each other's hands in delight, while maintaining neutral expressions, of course. Mike Lord was cruising out of NYC in the new four-wheel drive Chevrolet High Country Suburban. He had special ordered the SUV in the fall, as soon as the new models came out, and had it delivered to him earlier in the afternoon. OnStar said it would take 24 hours and 32 minutes of driving time to reach his new home in Austin, Texas, via the route he had chosen. He knew it would actually take the better part of a week because the country boy from Idaho was going to soak up the culture of the rural states he would traverse. After he reached Virginia, he intended to abandon the interstates, travel the country roads John Denver sang of, and visit the small towns in Carolina that Mary Chapin Carpenter sang about. He would sample homegrown jellies and jams sold in roadside stands and small local businesses and eat where the locals ate, far from the interstates and the hurried, harried people and lifestyle he had grown to hate. Their checking and savings accounts had been divided, but only after he bought his SUV. Since she outspent him 10-1 every month of their marriage, an $88,000 vehicle did little to even the score, but he took delight in using some of her money to buy it. Under the terms he offered, he would keep his investments and retirement funds, and she would keep her own. He was leaving her the penthouse apartment and would not go after her trust fund if she accepted his generous terms and signed the divorce papers within 10 days. The radio was on Sirius XM's best traditional country station, the Roadhouse. Joe loathed country music as much as she hated the oldies. Therefore, his next station would be classic vinyl. He was his own man now, not the clueless wimp husband she had made him for at least 2 years. He had taken control of his life when the ball fell on New Year's Eve last year and spent the entire year getting his stuff together. Taylor and Son would possibly survive his departure, but he strongly doubted it. Laboring under George's inept leadership, and deprived of the numerous design improvements and patents Mike had brought to the company over the past 5 years, he expected it to crash within a year or two. He smiled at the thought, knowing that his work had been responsible for more than half the new sales and profits in the previous year, and that he had better designs and design improvements ready to launch as soon as his new company could gear up. Oh, his old boss, the current chairman and George's daddy, Randolph Taylor, would likely sell the business off before it crashed, but George would be exposed to the world as the inept charlatan he was before that happened. Contemplation of that occurrence made him smile. Tonight, he had exposed George and his own cheating wife as immoral and unscrupulous derelicts of society. Over the next year, he would expose George's ineptitude as a businessman when his new company squashed his old like the bug that just got smashed on his windshield. Contemplation of which made him smile. He wished he could be a bug on the wall when Josephine's parents learned about his stunt at the ball. Helen had already called to tell him how wonderfully it had turned out. Having her spill the photos all over the ballroom was beyond his fondest dreams, although he had rigged the box to collapse when the tape was cut on any 3 sides. Her parents looked down on him from the start and were dismayed when their precious, perfect daughter chose to marry him. After all, he didn't even have an Ivy League education. That an engineering degree from the Colorado School of Mines and a master's from the University of Michigan made him highly desirable in his field meant nothing. Better a liberal arts degree from Brown than such a common pedigree. He smiled in contemplation of the destruction he had wrought, and of that he would produce in the future. Deirdre and her husband Albert took Josephine home. As soon as they walked in and she looked around, Joe started sobbing again. She had been rehearsing her presentation to Mike on the way home. She would explain that her affairs meant nothing to her, nor did they damage their marriage. They were simply recreation or efforts to influence decisions that affected her and Mike to make their lives better. The recreational intimacy only helped them too, she would explain. It got her libido back under control when it was running wild, and she learned things she used to please her husband to spice up their love life. It sounded ridiculous even to herself, and she knew Mike would buy none of it. Truth be told, he was a true stick in the mud when it came to his marriage vows. Even teasing about swapping or spicing up their marriage by role-playing with others angered him. Why, then, would she think he would buy this crock of crap she was planning to sell him? She knew in her heart that her marriage was toast, but walking into their apartment and finding all his things gone certainly brought the turkeys home to roost. She sunk to the floor, weeping bitter tears and cursing her own arrogance. She had no ready explanation for her actions because she never believed she would get caught, and if she did, her sweet, naive husband could be persuaded to forgive her. For 3 years she was successful, and then tonight he burned her house to the ground, and her reputation with it. The week passed quickly for Mike. He had cloned his new phone before removing the SIM card and tossing the old one in the snow of the city, so he could initiate contact, but no one could interrupt his journey through the Old South to his new home in Texas. The emails he had set up had been going out all week. Spouse after spouse had received a personalized email with an attachment, and marriage after marriage had gone up in flames. Contemplation of that result made Mike smile. The one to Deirdre's husband was sent yesterday. Contemplating Al's response made Mike smile broadly. Joe was responsible for her own actions, but Deirdre's recounting of the pleasure derived from her personal experiences as a cheating woman and encouragement of her friend to spread the joy by doing the same had actually been influential in Joe's decision. It was day 4, and back in NYC, Deirdre and Joe were sitting on the couch in their apartment. It was now their apartment because Al had thrown Deirdre out after he got his email and watched the video. It contained 5 segments of sexual activity and an enlightening conversation with Joe in which they chronicled their conquests and pleasures and listed their lovers by name while intermittently laughing about their clueless husbands. Albert had forwarded copies of that conversation to each of the wives of the men the women named if he knew them, and he knew most. The immolation spread, and Albert smiled as he contemplated the flames. George had fared no better. His father summarily fired him and disinherited him too. In fact, he fired all of the upper management that had been responsible for the black eye the firm got due to their actions and was acting as CEO, while his new vice president for talent acquisition development, Helen, recruited top executives from around the globe. Mike passed the exit to Martin Luther King and prepared to turn on Cesar Chavez. He could see Lady Bird Lake on his left as he drove past the Austin Convention Center, crossed Congress Avenue, and drove to the exclusive high-rise condo his new company was providing at 70 Rainey. The rent on the condo was paid for 6 months, giving him time to find the home with trees and lawn he so badly wanted. Once settled, he would buy a dog and begin looking for a new mate, one that would be trustworthy and who would love making a home for him and their kids. His new partners already had a barbecue planned at which they would introduce him as recently divorced, and promised there would be plenty of eligible women there. Meanwhile, back in NYC, the conflagration grew as outed spouses threw others under the bus, and wronged spouses shared what they knew about other wronged spouses. Helen kept Mike well informed. He contemplated the ever-growing flames of the great New York City fire he had lit and smiled. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.